We're back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome back. It's your friend Dom C here with another episode of the Draft Dodgers. Fun one today. Today really kicks off my positional breakdowns, and I'm trying to engage with some of the other, well-respected, better names, the guys that I look up to in this whole draft world, to have them come on the podcast. Break it down, get in the weeds a little bit on some of these guys. Today's a fun one, as I told you, defensive tackles. And I got two guys in here that I've recorded with in the past before. They've been gracious enough to come back on the podcast. So I'm so stoked to get into this. But before we do that, let's get the housekeeping out of the way. If you can, please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notification, do all that stuff on YouTube that the algorithm seems to like and favor so that my content gets out to more of the masses. Leave some friendly discourse in the comment section. I promise you I'll get back to you. You might not agree with me, but that's okay. We can have some grown adult conversation on why I'm right and you're wrong. I'm just kidding. This is a fun one, though, guys. We are full go, 60 days until the draft. So let's talk about some defensive tackles. First, let me bring into the stage from the Draft Analyst from 32 Beat Writers, my friend TJ Wengert. TJ, how are you, buddy?
Dude, Dom, man, I appreciate the intro. I appreciate being here, man. I'm excited to talk D tackles, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and we're not going to do it alone either. We got a third here. NFL writer, draft analyst extraordinaire from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Devin Jackson. Devin, what's up, buddy?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk to you guys all about the defensive tackle class. And, yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, Devin's in Indy already, if I'm not mistaken, right? You got there today, got there safe. We're able to get out with all the East Coast snow.
Yeah, thankfully so.
Thankfully so. So
it's been a rough couple of days for sure.
It sure has. Travel's a bear, man. I dealt with it right around trying to get down to Mobile. Flights canceled left and right, and the whole thing, it gets crazy. But before we get into this, since you're at the Senior Bowl, Devin, tell me the one guy off the top of your head who you're most excited to see from this positional group. What DT are you going to have your eyes peeled on for whatever reason?
Yeah, I think Caleb Banks. I want to see how he ends up testing. Obviously it's kind of been a strange year for him. Came in with a lot of hype and a player that everyone's kind of expecting maybe he goes top 10, top 15. Didn't quite happen that way. Only played 3 games in 2025. Went down the Senior Bowl, struggled day one at the Senior Bowl, but got better over the course of the week. He has all the size traits, measurables that you look for in defensive tackle. The guy that can kind of blend, the run stopping ability with the pass rushing ability. So I'm excited to see, at his size, what is he going to test in? What are kind of going to be the guys that maybe you match him up to in the past? I mean, a guy with his type of explosiveness and size, we really haven't seen since Jordan Davis. So I'm kind of excited to see, what he ends up testing at, what does he look like in those positional drills, and what he looks like against some of his peers. I think that's always the best part of the combine is trying to see, what all these guys are looking like together, all in the same group. Obviously like Peter Woods and Caleb Banks, because of last names, they're not going to be together necessarily, but they'll be back to back. So it'll be kind of a nice measure to see, two of the top guys, in the defensive tackle class. I guess a few others like Lee Hunter, K. McDonald. We'll get all into those names, but yeah. I think Caleb Banks is probably top of the list for me on, what does he come in at weight wise? What does he end up doing testing wise? All those different things.
Yeah. So before we get into it, TJ, let's get into the weeds a little bit here about Caleb Banks. Are you surprised that he did come back to kind of start and finish the season, the last 2 or 3 games that he did, and then, come down to Mobile and play? And we talked about him, first day kind of, kicking the rust off. But I thought after that he played, I thought he handled himself very well. So talk to me about the season with Caleb Banks. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, sorry, I have to say this joke, but I remember going down to the Senior Bowl and thinking, man, what are the odds we have an insane snowstorm the weekend of the Senior Bowl? What are the odds? And then fast forward a few weeks, it does the same thing for the freaking combine. So really, what are the odds that happens twice in one draft cycle? That feels a little heinous. Mother Nature trying to work against us draft analysts.
Yeah.
But that being said, no, Banks, I think situation kind of dictated that decision to come back and play, right? He was out of eligibility. So once you get the green light, you get the chance to come back. And it ultimately turned into a good decision to me. Like that Tennessee game is one that I've been a little bit lower on Banks throughout, the summer scouting process, the in-season. He's always been kind of a guy that, hey, he's going to go round one. I'm cool with letting someone else do that. And it's nothing against the player. Hopefully he proves me wrong. But that's just, I've kind of been an arm's length away. The Tennessee game was one that's like, ooh, see a couple of reps, see the disruption, a pop in his hands, and you're like, okay, you know what? I understand the hype. And really, that's always been my thing is like, I'm always with these prospects. So even if I'm not your guy, I'm not the guy taking you and pounding the table for you at 9 to Kansas City or whatever the case may be. I want you to win out, and I want you to prove me wrong, and I want to understand what other people see in you. So that was like the first game where I was like, yeah, totally. And it was a little bit more than just the flashes I saw from the year before. And then you get down to the Senior Bowl, and I think you guys nailed it on the head. Like day one, that was everything I've been worried about with Caleb Banks. Pad levels too high. He's shooting up, not shooting out. And then also, like, I get it, he moves well for 335, but why do we have to add that caveat? Like, I'm more interested in guys that move crazy versus crazy for that size. And now that's not always the case, right? Like Jordan Davis is one of those guys. He moves crazy for 350, whatever it was. And he's a great football player. So like sometimes it is that parallel, but sometimes you hear that and it's like, okay, well, at the end of the day, how does he move against his peers? How is he moving against others on the field? I don't care that he's X weight or X height. So, and that's across every position group, not just D tackles, not just offensive tackles.
Yeah.
But then day 2 and 3, that was kind of, and I actually had a nice little back and forth with Jordan Reed, kind of highlighting, we kind of saw it similarly on Extra in the Senior Bowl, where day 2, it's like, okay, I see the promise. And I thought the pad level, that's really the big thing. 6'5" is tough, man. And he's a little bit smaller than Deion Walker. And I will say, I wasn't super high on Deion Walker. I am more bullish on Banks than Deion Walker. And if you told me, hey, TJ, the Steelers get to draft Caleb Banks at 53, or they get the chance to draft Deion Walker in the 4th round, I'd probably be more interested in kicking the tires in 2nd round Caleb Banks. So just to kind of set a caveat for some of these guys who are just so big, and it's not easy to play with good leverage at 6'5", and for Walker at 6'7". That's a daunting task. And then you throw in the fact that, yeah, Banks coming off injury, only got to play in 3 games. There was a little bit of rust component to that. In day 2, played with a lot better leverage. And then day 3, I thought he brought it all together, even fielded a punt, got to jaw out with some of his teammates, man. I mean, I thought he put together a really nice close of the week. So I'm interested in Banks. He has moved up a little bit on my board. He's still probably the D tackle where I'm like, I'm good. If somebody else wants to take him round 1, that's fine. But I, at the same time, understand plenty of the pop and the flash and the draw towards the Caleb Banks.
Yeah, I don't think I need to add any more on Caleb Banks, and we probably don't need to touch on him anymore. He does not have a 1st round grade for me. He was close, but I just to kind of hammer on what you guys said, the leverage is really going to dictate how well he does. Like, and because he has heavy hands, he has length that he can kind of. When he shoots a gap, he can get out there and he can, he's got the reach to disrupt ball carriers in the backfield and all that stuff. He's got a big motor for his size when it goes. I think he's got the strength to kind of hold up and anchor good and hammer, bunker down against double teams. He's got to put it all together for a while. 2 years ago, we talked about, people talked about Caleb Banks in the top 10, right? And then the injury happened and so on and so forth. So I think for him, it's going to be the scheme fit that where he falls into. People are going to look at his side. Now, if he goes out and he runs a 40, like 5'1", like Jordan Davis, and forget about it. He's,
right.
He's the top half of the draft. But, I think people are going to see him kind of as, a versatile or multiple guy across the front. I really don't know if I want to count on him to play 0 or 1 a lot. I like him as that penetrating 3. I think he's that big body and that skill set, and those heavy hands, really, that does it for me for him. So I'm curious to see where he lands. Again, love the idea of him testing against his peers and seeing where he really falls athletically. Like I said, because, if he's in that 5, if his, 40 is in that 5 flat 5'1" range, and with a good 10-yard split, like that's like unicorn area. So
yeah, and he showcases some explosiveness right off that first snap. So it wouldn't shock me if the 10-yard split's pretty solid, and maybe even if he does the jumps, that could be interesting. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to kind of parallel it back to that 22 draft, because Jordan Davis was DT1 off the board that year.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, we're kind of talking about Caleb Banks. And I know some people have him as IDL1, but like we're talking about him as this Planet Theory guy. There's only so many guys that walk the face of the earth that look and play like a guy, in this case, like Caleb Banks. But all three of us don't have him at DT1. So that is just like another interesting caveat that we all recognize that like this dude is bigger and badder and meaner than most of them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we still know, like, maybe may not be the top dog in this D tackle. It's just interesting.
Dev, do you think he can handle some 5-tech in an odd front?
I think I probably would not, just because I think he does have some really nice juice. I think he does have some really nice athleticism, but I worried, one, about the pad level, and then two, how quickly can he get to the quarterback, the ball carrier from that alignment. I just think with a player his size and whatnot, you probably want him closer to the ball, closer to 1-3 tech, 2-eye, those type of alignments, more so than a 5 technique. I could see in like a short yardage distance type of thing, if you want to be kind of a little bit heavier.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you play a bear front, maybe you play 5-man front, you can move him around a little bit to jam up or to kind of clog up a lane. But I think with a player like him, already with some of those pad level concerns and whatnot, it probably want him closer to the ball as opposed to 5 tech.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, one last Jordan Davis parallel here. One of the things I'm interested in, Devin, you're the man on the scene, so you'll have to give us the insight on this. But like Jordan Davis, it was a loaded Georgia D line, but also the weight and then really his snap count per game it became this conversation around his conditioning. Can he hold up 17 games for a full snap count? I'm curious because, one, that's second to last year at Florida. Billy Napier, he wanted to have a lot of bodies on the D line, so the rotation was always moving. And then he got hurt this last year. So I wonder if, and you'll have to give us the report on this on the Buzz, but I'm curious to just the conversations he's having with teams that like, hey, dude, I'm excited. 17 games, give me 50 snaps, or whatever that number is, I'm ready for it. Or do teams kind of say, right now we're not entirely sure about that. So how much does that ding his draft stock? It's just kind of interesting what that conversation is going to be. Didn't work against Davis, who went 13 overall. I wonder how much it works against Banks.
Yeah, I think with Davis, you saw, obviously the full body of work probably was a little bit different too. The injury concerns there weren't there, but I also think he was such a unique player for when he came out that even though he was taken 13th overall and had a lot of investment, there's still questions. I mean, before last season, if they were going to pick up his 5th-year option, you're going to be a player that they see long term. And if it wasn't really for the breakout season that he had this year and being able to play all 3 downs and show his value, I think we'd be having a different conversation probably about Banks too. But yeah, I think with Banks, I think there's always going to be questions when you don't play a full game, for Banks, for any defensive lineman. But I also think, he hasn't had to do it. So, I think it's kind of one of those things like, just because they weren't asked to do it, doesn't mean they can't. Yeah. But for him, it's certainly going to be about conditioning and be able to hold his weight at the size. I think the most underrated part too, when we talk about defensive linemen, is that it's incredibly difficult to hold on weight, during the season.
Yeah.
Especially if you're playing a full, complementary load, you play all 3 downs, they got to eat 2,000, 3,000 calories a day to maintain that weight. So I think also too, like, that is kind of the hard part of it too, is what is his playable weight? What do the team see him playing as? And I think that will kind of inform us a little bit more too on, what teams kind of view him as. Do we view him more as a, interior guy, like 1 tech, 2-eye, kind of playing those types of roles, or do they see him more as a 3 technique? If I think it's the latter, you probably see him lose some weight, transition to NFL level.
Yeah, I don't disagree on that. Great discourse on Banks. Why don't we add this here, see if this works? Boom! There we go. We all fit here. So I went ahead and just real simply just listed 1 to 10, our top 10 guys. For the most part, everyone's got the same guys. I think there's one different guy on the board for each of us. So
pretty much, yeah.
Why don't we start with that? Why don't we start with the one guy that you have different, Devin, and break down Penn State tackle Zane Durant for us?
Yeah, Zane Durant is someone, in covering Penn State the last couple of years, I've gotten to see him up close, and and gotten to know him and see what he can do. Obviously, this year was kind of a drawback year. He wasn't as good as some of the previous years in terms of penetrating, being able to split gaps, really showcase some of his heavy-handed, quick twitch pass rushing ability. The defensive scheme changed a little bit, and I think because of that, he wasn't, playing as well as he was before. But I really like his explosiveness. I saw some of that again at the Senior Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just going to be undersized player, sawed off body type. He's not going to have a ton of length. So he's going to have to rely a lot on his explosiveness and, movement skills to, win as a pass rusher and, shoot gaps as a run defender. But, I just really like the profile, really like the player, I like the explosiveness he brings to the table. I like the physicality he plays with, even though he's a little bit smaller, a little bit undersized in that, in terms of interior defensive lineman. And I really think, the way that, the NFL is going, I think he's a guy that you want to have kind of in your defensive line room and do some unique things with, line him up at a few different spots. I don't think he's a guy that you can line up necessarily a 4-eye or 5 technique or even as an outside pass rusher, but I could see him being a valuable piece, like rotational piece that you can use with in pass rush games. And then a guy that, if you pair him up with a really stout interior defensive lineman that can eat up, multiple blockers, I can see him being like that one-on-one type player that, can slant or shoot the gap and create some negative plays.
Yeah, I will say this: his film review, I probably was a little bit lower on him than, and I don't know where TJ had him, but he had kind of a mid-third round grade on me. He popped obviously at the Senior Bowl. And I didn't, not that it changed his grade, but it made me go back and watch some of his film. And I think, what you said, I think him playing along those games along the defensive front is the thing that kind of stood out. Like, he's a gap shooter, and there's times I'd see him kind of, fake a swipe, come around and loop around the guys, the ends that were crashing in, so on and so forth, and get to the outside or vice versa. I think he can, like I said, I think he did a real good job flattening around the corner as that looper. I think he's got really, really good lateral agility. And the body size, you're right. He's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Defense tackle that's kind of that cut like that, like a little fire hydrant, is not, and a little bit on the lighter side, is not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I think a lot of, I don't know if it was last year or 2 cycles ago, the kid from Virginia Tech, Aeneas Pables.
Right.
It was last year. And kind of the same thing, real high energy, real good motor. I think Zane is a lot more physical than Peebles was, but there's a lot to like. And like I said, I just, I wish I saw more of it. I'll say this. I don't think where I evaled him, I don't know if he did anything what I thought at a real high or a real elite level. Like, I think his game was good all around. And there was times where, he was overmatched, but being so low, being so compact, did a real good job at leverage a lot of the times. I just wish there was something that was absolutely elite in his game. TJ, real quick on Zane Durant, your thoughts?
Yeah, he's my DT12. So just for those wondering who just missed the list, Tim Keenan's 11, Zane Durant is 12th. I'd take them both in the 4th round. They're 2 very different styles of D tackles when it comes to their strengths versus weaknesses. But, they honestly, in a lot of ways, I look at Zane Durant, and I love that Devin got him on here because he did have a good Senior Bowl. And I went back and looked at my summer rankings. He was my IDL 2 over summer. And then we actually had Max Chadwick from PFF on for that show, and he was IDL 3 for Max. So a ton of buzz coming into this season. And I still think there's a lot of interesting aspects to his game. Really, his quicks, I think that would be the reason you're drafting this guy. His get off the line of scrimmage, natural leverage. And I was just looking it up real quick, but teams that utilize stunts and twists, I mean, you guys hit it on the head there. That gamesmanship up front, this guy's going to be unfair screaming across the face of a guard. Like, they're not going to know what they saw, really. So the Rams led the league. Seahawks were 2nd. Cowboys were 3rd. New DC coming in. But then the Jags were there at 4th most. And that's kind of the fit with Anthony Campanelli coming back to be the DC. Could we see something where this team takes 2 defensive tackles and Durant's maybe the 2nd, or they're both taken on day 3, but one guy's kind of that run-stopping body And then one guy, Zane Durant, we're going to utilize these stunts and twists, utilize his quicks to our advantage. So I like the player, would take him on day 3, but totally understand why he's the top 10 guy for Devin.
Yeah. And we're going to go right into TJ's unique bird. The guy I feel like I've been scouting for every cycle for the past 14 cycles. Him and Bud Clark. Dante Corleone.
Yeah.
Go ahead, TJ.
Yeah, well, yeah, Corleone makes it on here, and yeah, we've been scouting him for a long time now. But yeah, honestly, it's him and it's Big Citrus there, Dominique Orange. I think the floor is really solid with both these guys. Corleone, the one exception, and this I may sound like I'm talking to both sides of my mouth here, because what we just talked about with Banks was a big part of the discussion. But often injured college players will often be injured players at the NFL level. Not always the case, but that is just often, at least how I notice it. So, like, I do worry about that with Corleone and the blood clots. Is that something that's going to linger? I'll leave that to team doctors to figure that out this week, and then whenever they have him back for team visits. But man, just what this guy is, sitting, playing with great leverage. Again, another guy with just unbelievable natural-born leverage. He's almost got that Puna Ford thing working for him, where he's the right height for the play style in his lower half. So just love how this guy can sit, hold against double teams, anchor the middle of the field. So it's really just a high floor prop. And I think, I'd be interested to hear y'all's thoughts on this, but I think a couple of years ago when you ask teams like, what's the biggest cheat code you could have in the league? And a lot of this is still true, and they're definitely still high-ranking reasons. But like, there was huge narratives around the rookie contract quarterback in that window, right? And then I think the narrative kind of moved to that you want that, but if you can win with 4, if you can win rushing with 4, that's your sweetest path to a Super Bowl. And now I wonder if Seattle, yes, they do that as well, but the ability to just live in nickel, right? Just live in too high. And part of that's Nicky Manwari and that type of a slot player. But the other is just the ability to stalwart against the run with 2 big guys in the middle. Byron Murphy's not the biggest dude, but like, he just plays the run at such a high level. So Corleone, maybe it's just recency bias. I just looking at that and I'm like, if you need to live out a nickel, this is a guy that enables you to do that. So I'll leave it at that. But interested in y'all's thoughts on both the theory, but also what you guys think of Dante Corleone.
Yeah, I think the medicals are going to be really important. Like the blood clots for sure, something that they can get them under control. But I think it's gonna. I mean, I remember Trey Smith quite a few years ago had the same thing, and I thought he was a much more valued or respected as a prospect coming out of Tennessee then. And what did drop him down to the 6th round or so? 6th or 7th round? I don't know.
I think I had a 3rd on him that year, just like on tape, and then he went in the 6th.
Yeah, something like that. So, I think that's going to be important. Now, I don't know. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to misspeak and kind of slander the kid. But somebody told me that Dante Corleone was at the Shrine Bowl and looked a little bit out of shape. I don't know if you guys saw that or if you guys can touch on that. If either of you there.
I watched the practice tape, but I don't remember him looking out of shape.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's who I was keeping up with versus the names that were popping off on the timeline, So it might be worth a revisit, honestly.
Yeah. Devin, what are your thoughts on The Godfather?
Yeah, I mean, I was there at practice, and, I think that's fair to say maybe a little out of shape, but I also think, he, kind of, I mean, for him to get through the season, 1, and then 2, I do know he was battling through like an ankle injury too. So I think that kind of contributed as well. But I think, it's kind of hard, obviously when you see, maybe a guy struggling a little bit in terms of that, your mind kind of goes to, maybe is he out of shape, whatnot. But I also think, it's been, we don't know how much the blood clots, I guess I'm trying to say, is affecting him or not.
Yeah.
And affected maybe the way how long he can play, all those different things. So, I think Combine Week will be a good kind of measure of, what is exactly those things, medically wise that, maybe affecting them, could affect them, at the NFL level. I think it's always a great week to find that out. But in terms of the player, I really love the player, obviously pre-injury. And pre-medical concern with the blood clots. I think he's kind of that bowling ball type of defensive tackle. Like we just talked about, with Zane Durant being more of a smaller, sawed-off player. Corleone's a little bit on the other side of things where he's going to be hard to move at the NFL level. Kind of a guy that is going to sit in those gaps and make it difficult for you to move him and force running backs to bounce to the outside. I don't think he has like any high end athleticism. I think he's mostly probably going to be a guy that, you know, maybe the short yardage situation type of
Yeah.
player, goal line type of player, where you want him to kind of stuff the middle of an offensive line, and maybe he can develop into a star down the road. But I think he's mostly a rotational backup type of player, kind of at this stage of his career. And obviously, you hope the medicals check out and that he can, make it
Yeah.
on an NFL team and kind of progress from there.
I think I think that's pretty spot on. You want to see he's not ready for 3-down play. I don't know if he'll ever be. The numbers don't really justify him being on the field and passing downs. I mean, he's a run stuffer. He's a big body. Keeps the people behind him roaming free. But I think there's definitely a role for him and guys of that stature and of that skill set in the league.
Real quick, when talking about the weight, this will say it all. He's listed at 335 at Cincinnati's website, so that's the number we're starting at. Didn't weigh in at the Shrine Bowl, so that would lead you to believe. Like, if you're not going to weigh in, that kind of tells you everything you need to know. So
yeah,
definitely worth a rewatch on that practice tape. But nevertheless, again, I'll just leave it at this: the ability to live in too high coverage. I think this guy, what he does for your run defense there, it's an important role. I think it's a specialized role, but I think it's becoming a more and more important one.
Amen. I hear that. I want to touch on the one guy that I'm unique on, that I think is probably one of the biggest, miscues by this NFL Combine by missing the invites. I don't know if you guys got into the tape for Aaron Graves. I thought it was really good. I have him right up there in the same, kind of that same tier with the Bennies, and for me, the Zane Durants and so on and so forth. He has, at just about 300 pounds, I think he's got length. I love what he does as a penetrating, push the pocket type defensive tackle, versa-pass. I mean, the win rate is good. He went, over 22% this year, in true pass sets, 14 sacks over the past 2 years. So he's doing it. He does it. He does it with a bunch of different techniques too, which is what I really, really liked about him. Very, very well advanced in, with his hand fighting, his strikes, everything he does good. He's stout against the run. I don't think he's, I don't think he's phenomenal, but I think he can serve his purpose. Like, I don't know how high end of an athlete he is. Like, he gets a lot of his wins and a lot of his stuff is motor and effort. And I think those guys, they're always a welcome part to an NFL roster and an NFL team. But you mix in that high end motor, that length, that body size, being 6'3", 6'4", probably pushing 300 pounds, with the technique that he has. I think you got the makings of a guy that will be on an NFL team and will sooner than later push for a kind of a starting role as a 3-tech. I think he's an even front guy, 3-tech, penetrating. That's what's best suited for him. He's not going to test through the roof. I don't think he's the most athletic guy in the world. You'd like to see a little bit more lateral agility, but to me, what he lacks there, I think he makes up with that being a high IQ player and being a really, really good technician. The pass rush repertoire is really good. From the swipes and the accuracy and the way he can win with power or speed sometimes. I think that Aaron Graves is kind of flying under the radar and a guy that not the mainstream media is not talking about enough. So one of you guys want to jump on him? I don't care.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Yeah, jump in. You got it.
Yeah, I like Aaron Graves a lot actually during the season, and when I'm watching Iowa and Max Llewellyn and Xavier Nwapa and all those different prospects, CJ Hall, Aaron Graves is always making plays. Always pushing the pocket. I really like his push pull move that he utilizes. Uses his length in the interior. So yeah, I would agree. I like him as a really good quality day 3 player. I think he's a guy that we're going to look in a few years and maybe he has, Zach Allen type of impact, a guy that, taking day 3 and turned into a really good, and at times dominant player. So I really like Aaron Graves. I think he's a really good player. Would love to see him land in a system that allows him to kind of develop even more and continue to hone in on his skills. But yeah, I mean, there were times that he looked more impressive than Llewellyn, on that defensive line, and a lot of people expect Llewellyn to get drafted before him. So Aaron Gray is a really good player.
Yeah, well, and then, Graves, my DT13 right there with Jackie Marshall. So those were the next two guys to not make the list. But no, Graves, and he's the first of I would take him in the 5th round guys. So I got a 5th on him. And he's just an easy guy to like you said earlier, technician. I think that's the right way to kind of put him. Hands are always fighting. That was the other thing. And one of the first things I noted from last year watching him over the summer was, if he doesn't win with that first initial move, this guy's going to keep fighting. He's going to go to the next. And you have some guys that win off of traits and they don't have the ability to get to that second. So for him, especially considering the play style of, that pass rush technician, it's nice to see that he's ready to go to one move, stack it with the next. And he's willing to keep fighting throughout the rep. So it is going to be interesting to see how he tests. I don't expect anything crazy, but that's an interesting bar to set, because if he tests anywhere better than your expectations, you start looking at him a little bit differently. You start to feel a little bit better about him. You move him up the board just a little bit more. So interested by him this week at Indy as well.
He won't be in Indy. He didn't get the invite.
Oh, that's right. You're right.
Yeah, I don't know why, but right. I'd be pissed.
I'm shocked. Still, I couldn't even believe it.
And it's all good.
We got pro days for it, and think about that home setting. The numbers will look that much better. So, and they all go in the beast. So,
but you know what? It's funny that you say people think that Max Llewellyn will get drafted. I mean, different positions, and I get that. But time into time, I watch a lot of the Iowa defense, and I thought there was a lot of the times where Graves was hands down the best player on that defense, on the defensive front for sure. So it just all the edge rushers always get all the glory, and the interior guys do all the groundwork. But I digress. Let's go. Now we've got all the rest of the guys I think we have on the board in different order. So we'll just go. Why don't we touch on TJ? You have Grayson Halton, the highest of. Actually, I don't think Devin has. Oh, he does. He has him at 10. So I'm at 7. Devin's at 10, and you're at 5 with Grayson Halton. Probably one of the biggest surprises for me down from Mobile was Halton.
Interesting. Yeah, I know you guys clearly hate Grayson Halton. That's totally fine. No, the Senior Bowl was definitely like to me, it was like a great showcase for who I see him as, like this great one-on-one pass rush winner and the ability to kind of shoot gaps. So again, we're talking about like a 4-man front. Like again, Jacksonville's a team that I've mocked him to a lot in the 2nd round. So I'm very curious on those types of fits. Great mover. I think he also plays the run really well for being right at 300 pounds. I think it was 296 at the Senior Bowl. Hands are super quick. Good first step to go with it. So I think you're just getting a whole lot in regards to the pass rush side, and he doesn't leave a whole lot lacking behind right thereafter as a run defender. I liked him, and he was just kind of not necessarily like he's not the top guy in this class, right? And I've kind of said this about like Mekhi Lemon. He's not like the number 1 player on my board, but there's just these guys I always come back to. It's like, dude, I could watch these guys literally from sun up to sundown. And like Halton is kind of that guy for me on the D-line. Love his tape. Thought the Senior Bowl was everything I could have been a fan of his game. So no, I'm very bullish, and that's nothing against Christian Miller. Part of that is just like he's a great run defender, and I love his body frame. Like the wingspan, I think is going to be off the charts. And I also wish if he had more one-on-one opportunities and just a little bit of a different schematic look there at Georgia, what that could have done to unlock him maybe to another level. But that being said, he's still a really good football player. I think I'd just rather go for the pass rush side of Halton versus what I know I'm getting with Miller as a run defender. Because again, I think Halton does it at a pretty good mark there too as a run defender. But I'm pretty bullish. I take him in the 2nd round, probably late 2nd round.
Yeah, sub 300-pound guys. You expect them to move the way Halton moves and how he can get to the passer. But I think you kind of struck a chord there, is that just because he's small, and he is kind of small, call it what it is. I think he's what do you measure at 6'2", 290?
I think it was 296 at the Senior Bowl. Here, let me pull it up real quick.
You don't expect him to be as big of a force and as dominant against the run as he was this year. He held his own. Devin, Grayson Halton, thoughts?
Yeah, it was a guy that really surprised me, at the Senior Bowl. Not that, I wasn't necessarily aware of him and what he brought skill set wise. I have a couple friends that cover Oklahoma, and they're telling me about him and his pass rush ability. But for him to kind of stack continually really good days against some really good interior offensive linemen, show that athleticism and flexibility and pass rush arsenal, and show some nice things in the run game too. Made me go back to the tape and watch him, and that's why I ended right at number 10 for me. I think for me, Rayshawn Benny and Holden are in kind of that same bucket in terms
I'm going to bring up Benny next. Yep.
Really, really nice complementary pieces. I think in your defensive line room, I don't think those guys are going to necessarily be like, full-time starters, but I think they can play some nice roles in a defensive line room. But yeah, they finished right about the same for me. Two guys that really stood out at the Senior Bowl, and Holden is a guy I think a lot of people are gonna, especially after he tests here in Indy. I think a lot of people are gonna have him shooting up boards a little bit.
Real quick, sorry, not to prolong the point here on Holton, but Benny too, also sub 300 pounds. But you watch him against the run, and it's like, God, you really wouldn't have guessed that. Great pound for pound strength, great body control, and I don't know, just a great strong lower half to go with it. But I think also to your point, Holton's going to test well this week. The thing that really kind of popped for me at the Senior Bowl, this was kind of the same for Darius Alexander last year. Sometimes it's hard for me. You see guys on tape, and it's like, I think the hands are quick, but I just need to see it once live and in person to just verify it. That was it for Holton. And man, I thought the hands fired, and I thought the same thing about Darius Alexander last year, who went top of the third round. So, and I was super bullish on him. I think he was IDL 5 or IDL 6 maybe for me last year. So two guys I kind of see in a different usage, a little bit different body types, but similar draft range. I'm really excited about drafting him.
And what the interesting thing about Holton too is he was used all over the formation, right? I mean, the majority of his snaps came in the B. But he did line up in some, 1 or 2 wide. They even had him outside at sometimes 5, even wider than that sometimes. So he can move all over the place. Now we'll go right into Rayshawn Benny, which we all have him kind of in that same area. When you talk about a guy who at just under 300 pounds, shouldn't move as quick as he does. Those are my first notes that I have on him is how is quickness, twitch. How does a guy this big get to the sideline that fast? Like the way that he kind of moves for a big guy, I think is really, really good. Again, one of those smaller compact guys. I think he bends really good as the looper and stunts. He knows, he does the interesting things. Like, he knows how to get skinny at the right time and kind of split those double teams where he's, might be overmatched at times. He's got a ridiculous swim move. I love watching the little guy with those little stubby arms doing it, but plays with good leverage. I just wish that you saw more of him, right? Mm-hmm. He just hasn't been on the field all that much and, at his time in Michigan. And, I don't know if you guys, I think he's in a weird spot because I think the closer he got, the more reduced down he got on the line, I think the more he struggled. So I'll let TJ. I'll start with you on Rayshawn Benny real quick.
Yeah, I mean, this is another guy where a 4-man front. That's kind of where I'm thinking this guy's a D tackle kind of fits in more so than 3-4 nose. Like definitely not thinking that type of role. And even looking at 3-4 DN, I guess that would be the spot. But again, thinking at the end of the day, nickel's the new base. Teams are primarily in that nickel or dime formation. They're going to be in that 4-man front because of that. So 4-man front D tackle, I think that's kind of his home. But yeah, I think you said it. One of the first things I wrote down, it's funny that you said that, was great read and react skills. His eyes are all over it. And then on top of that, another thing that you noted, great at the point of attack. And I think it's leverage. I think it's that lower body strength. It is, just mass in his lower half, pause. But that's where he makes his money in the run game. And then he's a really functional athlete. And he has that good body control. And he is kind of I don't want to say crafty pass rusher, because that probably would more coincide with what like a hand technician like Graves. But yeah, he just has a knack of getting skinny at the right time, like you had said, and he finds a way to get in the backfield. So it's interesting. He's all around this place for all three of us, 9, 10, 9. He's kind of like the easy sell on day 3. They're like, hey, you know what? We need a guy. I know everyone's on board for this. Rayshawn Benny it is. So it's kind of interesting how universally appreciated he is, but not, towards the top of this class. So
Devin, why don't you lead us off with Christian Miller? And again, he's a guy, I will say this, Jets fan, unfortunately, but he's a guy that I have, kind of a big circle on, right at the top of that round 2. If depending on how the first round goes, which we don't know yet, but he's a guy that I would love to have anchor that defensive line. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about him, Devin.
Yeah, I think of my 3, 4, 5 spot, it's probably the most unsettled group because I feel like any of those guys feel comfortable taking as like the third defensive tackle off the board, just depending on what scheme you're running, what you're looking for. And I think of the three guys, Miller probably has the highest ceiling in terms of, he's still tapping the surface, especially as a pass rusher. But man, I really love the physicality he plays with.
Strong as an ox, too.
Yeah, for a guy as big as he is and the power he plays with, he also has some surprising quickness that can, split double teams, that can shoot gaps, that can make plays in the backfield, with his power and then with some of his athleticism as well. I think he's a guy who's going to test out of this world, at the combine. Georgia has been known to produce some freaky defensive tackles, and I think he's kind of the next one, in line to do so. And I see some, toward the end of the season at the least, you can see him start to get a little bit more comfortable as a pass rusher, start to commit to a little bit of a plan, not just all bull rush, not just all, trying to win with speed, trying to combine the two. And I think, a lot of people are going to bill him as just a run defender, and that's what he is right now. But I think, of those three guys, he has the most likely chance to turn into a guy that, can be an excellent run defender and then get you 4 or 5 sacks, too, as an interior defensive lineman. So I think he's a guy that, that I'm just so excited to see in person, what he moves like in person, stacked with some of the other people, other defensive linemen in this group. And then, two, just excited to see, how he continues to grow when he gets to the NFL level. Are they going to play him, as a 3-tech? Are they going to play him as a 1-tech, as a 2-eye? Are they going to play on kind of that Byron Murphy role? It kind of, it kind of gives me a little bit of those shades in terms of like a lot of people are like lukewarm on him, and then he went out. Obviously Byron Murphy went out and destroyed the combine, and was such a freak athlete that teams had to take him in the first round. I don't think Miller is going to get to that point, but I do think I feel like I'm probably going to be a little bit higher on him coming out of the week, and I feel like a lot of people in the NFL and in the draft community will be too.
No,
yeah,
I love the shout, Christian Miller. I think the high end comp here is Derek Brown, right? Like not necessarily body type 1-for-1, because I think he'll probably have longer arms. I don't know. I have to go back and double check on what Derek Brown was, but I'm with you. I think Derek Brown could be like the ceiling here for Christian Miller. Now it's just, where do you take that guy? Brown went a whole lot higher than where I think Miller's going to go, and there's going to be a pathway there. There's going to be some work to get him there, but I think by the end of his rookie contract, could we be talking about him in the same light? I'm with you. I'm bullish on Miller. I do think it's just going to take a little bit of time, but freaky athlete, long arms, that's a pass rush project I'm willing to take on versus some of the other ones we've seen in the last couple of years drafts where it's like, I'm good on that project. Miller, I can totally understand. And I'm really kind of crossing my fingers. Houston at 33 or 38, excuse me. I know the Jets there at 33. That does make a lot of sense, Dom. But Houston, like, God, if you just let D'Amico Ryans cook, that could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's such a.
So take him at 33.
Yeah, well, we better take him at 33 if we don't address earlier. But I mean, I don't have to add too much. I mean, the explosiveness that he plays with, and for me, I definitely think that there's not a lot of nuance to his, pass rush. Like Devin talked about, there's not a plan there. There's not a lot of nuance. He wins with that, him being ridiculously stronger than most of the opponents that he played against in college. I don't know if that'll be the same at the NFL level, but if I'm going to take chances on traits, right? And I talked about it earlier, I think with Zane Durant, where there's nothing that was really, to me, elite. I'm going to take a chance on a power profile for sure, and hope that you can build some some pass rush nuance in there, because there's arguably I don't think there's going to be a stronger defensive tackle than Christian Miller at that combine. Like if he does bench press, I'm sure he's going to be in at the top, if not at the top 3. But we do have those 3 kind of guys that are all that similar skill set, kind of all right there between Miller, Hunter, and McDonald. I'm a little bit lower on McDonald than the two of you, so I'll let you two talk about Caden McDonald. TJ, you lead it off.
Yeah, just another one of these guys you look at and you're like, he's 325? Huh? Well, that doesn't make sense. And another one of these guys where like the lateral movement is just absurd. More so, like he moves great in a vertical plane, explosive out of his stance. All that's true. But you watch him move left to right. And the same is true about Christian Miller and a lot of the other guys we've talked about. But I think McDonald is like the top tier of that. And then it's just about putting together a pass rush plan for him at the next level. I think he's better than Tyreek Williams. And I was kind of someone that, hey, you get to the back end of the first round, Detroit, right? I thought that made sense for what they wanted to do. They want to be able to play again with two safeties over the top. I thought I understood the logic there, and I like Caden McDonald more. So frankly, I'm all on board with him going. Once you get past, I don't know. Honestly, I can't rule out Minnesota at 18. I could totally see a world where they want to pair him up with Jalen Redmond. So like once you get to 18, I think it's fair game for Caden McDonald.
Yeah, the lack of pass rush plan, moves, counters really, really hurts it, and he really hasn't done it all that long. Like, does that bother either of you guys? The fact that he's really kind of just come on to be, in essence, a one-year wonder here.
Yeah, I think you're always worried a little bit too when guys, kind of come out of nowhere, not come out of nowhere in the way like, weren't known before, but really put together one strong season right before they get drafted. Especially at the defensive tackle position, I think there's a little bit more variance in the way that things can end up for interior defensive linemen, just because it depends on the scheme you land with and, who you're surrounded by, what you're asked to do. Are you going to play the position you're supposed to play or a position that they need you to play? So I think all those things in mind, I think McDonald, I think the most encouraging thing is that, especially in their biggest games throughout the year, he was consistent in making plays. And obviously you're playing alongside a defense with so many NFL guys, but there are times where you just couldn't take your eye off of him. Whether it's the quickness at his size, the heavy hands, ability to push back, interior offensive linemen. So, yeah, I think there's a level of, hesitation a little bit too. Maybe you don't take him first round, maybe you don't take him back into the first round. But, I think obviously it would depend on how he ends up testing, if he truly is the athlete that he puts on tape. But two, I think, he's obviously going to be an early run down defender and maybe there's space for him to develop as a pass rusher. But I think overall, I feel pretty good about obviously the tape that he put forth. Obviously the 1 year production, you're always worried if that's going to translate. But I think, his size, versatility, athleticism, all those things, he checks those boxes. And, I think he can be an early contributor.
Well, hold on. Let me amend my earlier statement. Starting at pick 16, I think it's fair game for Caden McDonald. Forgot about the Jets there at 16 before Minnesota. Yeah. But all that to say, and let me counter this argument with, it's a little scary to draft a guy 1 year breakout. But think about next year's class, and I know it's loaded, the quarterbacks galore, receivers also. But think about where Amari Washington's going to go next year and when you might start feeling comfortable if he doubles down on what he did last year. And I think I would have Amari ahead of Caden if he did declare this year. But that's the other side of the coin, is where you might be getting him at a discount. Because if he stayed another year, he might have gone a lot higher next year's class. Different class and everything, so it's not necessarily 1-to-1, but that's just my counter to your argument there. So I don't know. I think he's going to test out of the roof. I think he's going to go crazy this week in Indy.
Yeah. Listen, I hope so. I hope to see that this group of guys who, are this, where we have them grouped, like 2 through 5. These are the guys that are really going to be the meat and potatoes of this, of what I think is a really deep defensive tackle class. But a couple more guys I want to get through. Why don't we just fire through one by one here? Devin, why don't you talk and give us your eval on DJ Jr., the Florida State defensive tackle, Devin Jackson Jr.
Yeah, he kept following me from Shrine to Senior Bowl. I can't believe that, it's been a long time since we see a guy do both of those games. Obviously, little territory there between the Shrine and Senior Bowl. Like if you go to one game, you're going to play in one game. But the fact that he went to both, I think, speaks volumes into the player that he is, and just getting more in front of more NFL personnel. But yeah, I mean, he's uniquely built, extremely tall for a defensive tackle. So there's a little bit of concern there for me in terms of the pad level and, the ability for offensive linemen to get under his pads a little bit. But he's long arms that can really be a difference maker in the interior. He can kind of control the rep and plays with a lot of power. He's not really a guy that I think is going to be a gap shooter, but he's more like he's taking on blocks. He wants to stack and shed. He takes on double teams, all those different things. He's a really unique player in that aspect. I'm kind of interested again to see testing wise what he ends up at. Is he a good athlete? Is he elite athlete? Where does he kind of fall in that bucket? Which kind of is the reason that he's where he is in my rankings, because I'm worried a little bit about how much athleticism does he have. But in terms of the run defending ability, what he can do pushing the pocket wise, I think he's a quality player to have. Rotational player that maybe can be a starter within a few years in the league and kind of be a reliable 3-down player eventually. But right now I see him as kind of that run stuffer, guy could take on double teams and kind of be disruptive in the run game.
Yeah, he's a guy that I've been, consistently gravitating towards, when I do a lot of my Jet content, because I think he's an Aaron Glenn type of defensive tackle, guy who, Glenn wants his guys to maintain their gap integrity, kind of read and react and not necessarily push forward. And I think that's where he excels. He is tall, he is big. The leverage is going to be a deal with that. So we'll see how that all works out. But he's a guy who it's hard to miss. And I shook his hand there, and let me tell you, he's got to have 15-inch hands or something like that. I mean, his hand pretty much reached right up to my forearm. So I digress. Lee Hunter, TJ, talk to us about Lee.
Well, first, echo all y'all's thoughts about Daryl Jackson Jr. Really interesting player there. Lee Hunter, man. The more I watch, the more I just can't get enough of Lee Hunter. 325, explosive out of his stance, holds the point, I think, really well at a nose tackle spot. I think he's athletic enough to play a little bit of 3-tech. You can get a little bit of versatile. So, you could play him at nose when you're going base. But then when you get into those passing situations, I don't think he has to come off the field. I like the hands. I like the power behind them. I think he moves well out in the open field. And the one weakness I kind of saw was, I think double teams move him. And that's not ideal, specifically when we're talking about a nose. Then we got into the Senior Bowl. And again, it's tough to weigh 3 days versus a whole season's worth of tape. But it's a part of the equation somewhere in there. And the guy just refused to be blocked and he refused to be moved off the point of attack. So, and he was even ruining when they were doing the warmups and just trying to get guys in the double teams, you're just trying to get them on the same page, and he's ruining warmups. So I don't know. I just can't get enough of this guy. And again, just another example of these guys who freaky movers considering they're 320 plus. But I think Lee Hunter also brings it from a power standpoint. And I'm just really interested to see what the pass rush side turns into at the next level.
Yeah, I think for Lee Hunter, some of my notes, I have super high floor, and what I mean is just like I think he's one of the better run defenders at the position already, and what he can offer in the pass rush, I agree wholeheartedly, TJ. This is a guy that's not going to leave the field, sooner than later. Sexy Dexter Lawrence comes into mind when I see Lee Hunter. A lot of correlation there, and that might be a little bit high praise for Lee Hunter because I think Dexter Lawrence is phenomenal. But
hey, I said Derek Brown earlier for Christian Miller, so yeah. We're throwing out high end comps here. Why not?
There's a lot of that in his game, and I think for me, and I remember back that when Dexter Lawrence came out of Clemson and whatnot, I don't think he had as much fanfare or as much media hype as Lee Hunter has now. Maybe that's because of what Lee Hunter did at the Senior Bowl and how big he was and so on and so forth. But Lee Hunter is going to be a force in this league, I think, for a while. Just really, really, super strong, good closing, good, closing speed for a guy his size. I think he can hold up, stacking and shedding. I think he can penetrate. He doesn't miss too many tackles. He's got under a 6% missed tackle rate, which is nice to see. So,
and And also, one last thing on Lee Hunter. I'm also a sucker for a guy that goes from one school, takes that step up in competition, and his step up in play as well. And UCF transfer, gets the bag to go to Texas Tech, harder competition, tougher schedule. And now, granted, he had a ton of talent across that D-line. I understand it's a pretty good situation, but it's still a step up in comp, and we saw the step up in play.
Yeah, I think wasn't he somewhere else before UCF?
Let me triple check.
I think he was.
I got UCF to Texas Tech, but
I could have swore he was somewhere else. I could be wrong. I digress.
He was at Auburn.
He was at Auburn, right?
Okay.
He didn't play. He didn't play too much, I'm sure.
Okay.
But I knew he was one of the guys that went multiple schools.
That's right.
So.
Yeah.
All right, we touched on all 9 other guys. Why don't we go ahead and I'll open up with Devin. Give us Peter Woods. Why is Peter Woods number 1? How far ahead is he from the other guys? And then we'll get into TJ, and I'll close it up with Peter Woods.
Yeah, he's a few spots on my big board ahead of Caleb Banks, so they're both in like the late 20s for me.
Okay.
I think it's hard to see how dominant he was in 2024 and believe he's still not that caliber of player. And even at times in 2025, you saw flashes of dominance, saw flashes of like, the handwork that he has, the explosiveness that he has, as a run defender and pass rusher, the multiple alignments they use him in, not so much in 2025. They use him a lot in the nose tackle range was like, mind boggling. Like, why is he, doing that in the first place? Because it's really not his game. But yeah, man, there's so much to like about his skill set. There's still so much to like about, what he does on a down and down basis, how explosive he is, how well he moves at his size, and just how, disruptive he can be, when everything is aligned, when he's playing at a high level. You just didn't see enough of that in 2025. But you also, you see a lot of these advanced stats and the fact that, teams were specifically scheming to get the ball out quickly against Woods and Parker, specifically making sure that they didn't wreck the game. So I think this one is a little bit of a complicated one, but I think with all the factors and knowing that when he is at his best, the concerns that you have with some other guys aren't as great, with him versus some of the other players, below him in our rankings. And the 3-down impact, I think, is huge. We have seen, the last 2 Super Bowl winners and Seahawks and Eagles, when they have a guy that has that game-wrecking ability, they have a Byron Murphy, they have a Jalen Carter, players like that, Milton Williams, guys like that. When you have that 3-down ability, especially that pass rush ability on, win those one-on-ones against, guards or centers, can run games, can run stunts, all those different things. I think Woods, if you put him in more of an attacking front where he's playing more 3 technique, I tend to believe he can be, one of the better players at the position, just based on the skill set and what he brings athleticism-wise alone, and obviously he needs the consistency aspect. He needs to play a little bit cleaner in that aspect. And just, on a down-and-down basis, you want to see consistency. But, the highs of Peter Woods, I think, outweigh pretty much every other prospect in a defensive line class.
Yeah. So real quick for me, and you said you have them somewhere in the 20s, Devin. So I'm assuming you don't have a first-round grade on it.
They're both early second-rounders. Yeah.
See, he was my last first-round grade of this class, and I'm probably a little bit more bullish on him and the projection of him. I graded him out higher than I had Mason Graham last year, and I think that there's a lot of comparisons to me in their games, and I understand how everyone was kind of Clemson fell flat on in every way, shape, and form on both sides of the ball. So I understand how there was a lot of hype for the guys like him and TJ Parker that kind of just felt like the pin went into the balloon and it was deflated. But man, there is a rare like kind of fluid explosiveness for a guy that size. And he showed it all over the place. Like, he's got reps coming off the edge. He's light on his feet and he moves so well laterally. I think he's got heavy hands. He's pretty good with his punches. He's accurate. He's low and he's inside with them. There's no lack of effort, in anything that he does, meaning the legs are constantly moving, the drive, even the way that he'll just, bury his feet and anchor in against the run. I just think that there's so much to like, right? I think that there's so much to like, projection and upside wise about Peter Woods that you put him in the right situation. Like I said, I think Mason Graham's a good pro, comp or a target to kind of put him at. I think, early career Quinnen Williams, where he was much more aggressive gap shooter, in the solid front. I think that he can do a lot of that stuff. I think he's going to clean some stuff up. He's not, the surest tackler up front, a lot of missed tackles, and all that stuff is kind of just can be kind of ruled out or taught out of him. Interested to see him. Interested to see how he measures. I want to see if where that arm length is. But man, I happen to be really, really bullish on Peter Woods. Like I think that the talks really start with him, as high as 9 or 10, with the Saints or with the Saints or with the Chiefs. So I'll turn it over to you, TJ. Tell us about Peter Woods.
No, I think all that is fair. I think you guys have hit this one on the head. Right now, for my big board, he's at 17, right behind Vega Ioane and right before Mansour Delane. So I like him, middle of the first round. I think I'm more than comfortable with that swing of the bat. I think 8 as early as 8 does make sense. Pair him up with another former Clemson Tiger and Brian Brzee. Really, my eyes are on Clemson, man. Like, this is becoming a trend that I feel like we just got to talk about. Clelin Ferrell, Miles Murphy, Brian Brzee himself, and then now Peter Woods. What is the deal with the law of diminishing returns with these guys who pop as freshmen and then the rest of their career happens? So I'm looking at their coaching staff, to be honest with you. I'm like, come on, man. Like, you have so much talent rolling through there. Dom, I think you hit a nail on the head, like attacking 3-tech. Like, let this guy be more aggressive the next level. And then for the tackling concerns, I think midway through this year, he might have hit a point where, he kind of saw the writing on the wall. Clemson's not going to go win a natty and maybe pull back just a little bit. So I think you get him on a team that's going to keep him engaged, keep the energy at 100%. I think you're going to get more of what we saw in 24-25 than we saw at 25-26. And then kind of on that note, in a draft class where the top end talent isn't, super elite, not blue chippers left, right, and center, it is interesting when you look at this class more so from their holistic career or at least from a 2-year sample size. And when you do that for Woods, it obviously looks a lot better. But in this class where you're trying to figure out who should be going that high, I wonder how much that weighs in teams' evaluations, looking at it from 2 years instead of 1.
Yeah. Man, that was we're already at an hour here, so we're going to go ahead and kind of wind this down. I'm telling you guys, I thank you because that was the fastest hour that I think I've ever chatted. And I appreciate you guys for being here with me. Before we close, though, put you guys on the spot. TJ, I'll start with you. Of your top 10, what's your favorite match between top 10 defensive tackle and team?
Sure. Oh, man, that's a great question. You kind of even said Woods, early Quinnen Williams. So the Jets at 16, that's a good one. I'll say Grayson Holton to the Jags, though. I think that would be one. And that's one I just keep mocking a ton right there at 56 once we get to the second round. It's their first pick. It's at an impact position we thought they might draft last year. It's a position they can get better at. And, they utilize those stunts and twists, like I said earlier. I think he fits that attacking defensive line and what they want to do. And he then gets to work in tandem with Trayvon Walker, Josh Hines Allen. I think he could be a guy who, in that scenario too, would put up a lot of production right away.
Devin, what about you? Of your top 10, give me your best fit on an NFL team.
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat what TJ said earlier, but I'm gonna go Christian Miller to the Texans. I just think the player, the mindset, the way that he plays matches what you're looking for and a Houston defensive tackle, and matches with what they're looking for and what they need. Frankly, they don't need a lot on that Houston defense, but a guy that can make plays, especially in the run game. Because I think a lot of people talk about how dominant that Texas defense was, but they were a little susceptible in the run game, and it's because their defensive tackles weren't as strong as they needed to be. And I think you add Christian Miller to honestly, Christian Miller or Caden McDonald, I think would be great fits. But I think Miller specifically, knowing the types of players that Houston has gone after with D'Amico Ryans as coach, the type of dog mentality that he likes to have in his players, I could see Miller matching a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with. I think I'm going to stick with Peter Woods to the Chiefs. Whether that happens or not, whether that really happens or not, I think the Chiefs are in a unique situation because they're going to have to reset. Kind of do a quick reset really hard. I know Jerry Tillery's under, or his contract's up. Chris Jones isn't getting any younger, right? And if you put, you put a guy like Peter Woods next to Chris Jones in between, Karlaftis and maybe hopefully they bring in another, real bendy, speed type rusher on the other side. I think that's where he could really, really kind of not be the target, as he was in and kind of be like the secondary or tertiary option there for the offenses to kind of hone in on. And I think he'll really, really benefit from there. I think sky's the limit for Peter Woods. I really, really like him as a player. And I got to be honest with you, I think this defensive tackle class is very underrated top to bottom. I think you're going to see good players well down. You'll see 15 or 20 of these guys get taken. I think they're going to be, players in the league for, quite a few years. So I'm interested to see what happens. Big week here in Indianapolis, 60 more days to the draft. TJ, why don't you tell everybody where they can see you, where they can find you, and obviously all the stuff, guys, all the contact information for TJ and Devin will be, on the video. But go ahead, TJ, let them rip.
Yeah, absolutely. You can give 32 Beat Writers a follow on Twitter at just that. If you're a big fantasy football fan, I'm sure you probably already know the account. And then we're, pushing pretty hard to the YouTube side of everything. So find us on YouTube at 32 Beat Writers. You can follow me on Twitter with just my name. So right down there at, and then that. So that's everywhere you can find me and find all my work. Dom, also, I echo your thoughts real quick. This was a summer scouting group that left me really disappointed. And I just love the fact over the course of this year, it's done a complete 180 for me. And now it's one of my favorite, position groups to talk about in the 2026 draft. So I totally echo your thoughts.
Awesome. TJ. Devin, let everybody know, brother.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever you call it today, at @reald_Jackson. All my work is on Inquirer.com. Be on site for the combine and taking it all in. Coincidentally, defensive line is going to be up first for the media session. So I'm sure the Peter Woods, Caleb Banks, and Caden McDonald podiums are going to be quite the ride to try and get around and talk to other guys. But yeah, excited for all the coverage that I'll have for the combine. Going to be there through Saturday and talk to every position group here at the draft. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. Guys, again, if you haven't given Devin or TJ a follow on X, definitely do, because you're missing out if you don't. I mean, the content that they put out is all, the stuff that they're putting up there is really awesome. I meant it when I said it, off camera, guys. Like, I look forward to, and always really respect and honor the stuff that you guys put out. You do such a good job. For younger guys in the industry like myself who are just cutting their teeth, man, it's a pleasure and honor to have you on this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, another episode of the Draft Dodgers is in us. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, do all that, YouTube algorithm stuff. And make sure you subscribe to the channel, Project Prospect _NFL. And catch more videos like this. We have DTs today. We got edges next week. And we're just getting going here. So on behalf of Devin and TJ, I'm Dom, and we're out.